And Dr. Samovar will cover some of the things that I don't cover. I've never lectured so fast. Too bad the jokes are funny, but let me say I autographed 5 different copies of my little booklets, and instead of writing down all the conclusions, they're in the books. And if you're interested, please take the books out of the communication library. Hi. And hi. These are people from UCSD, trying to get them interested in general semantics in this way of teaching, because they're very, very theoretical. They're very scholarly. But Korzybski says you haven't learned general semantics until you behave that way. Big difference between learning something intellectually and cortically and behaviorally, and that's why I've created the little Berman quizzes that I share with you. So I gave 5 booklets. I've got a lot in my office here. I'm not even trying to sell them. These are chapters of the big book that I wrote, and I had 1 chapter to go, an awful lot of stuff. I'm going to finish that one last chapter of where I brought all of these principles together into one scientific principle called the extensional and intentional orientation. And if you'll pass this around, please, I'm showing the extensional and intentional orientation. Now, I'm just going to give the highlights of the 3 other important principles in effective communication. As I told you, I changed Dr. Irving Lee's course around. He had the signal reaction principle at the end of the course, but I have found that if you can just pause, delay, and analyze, use the cortex. You see, that's what we're trying to do. This is the neurological aspect of general semantics. The cortex is the part of the brain where you differentiate, where you see differences, where you observe and notice that student 1 is not the same as student 2. And literally, and if we had more time, you can have a training session in the trained observer. In fact, there's a young PhD, just got his PhD, teaches now at Texas A&M. And he wrote an excellent article, and I will send it to Larry and put it in your library. There are a lot of things that I've been meaning to send to both schools, and I will send to both schools, on training in public speaking, stage fright, training in general semantics. And this is what Dr. Lee and I talked about before he passed away. So maybe sometime with the money that I've given, you'd have different professors coming in. They all have a different slant, a different approach, a different way of teaching. But this is getting off of the verbal level onto the nonverbal level. Training in the extensional orientation, as you will see in the thing that I just passed out. So here we have the cortex, and here we have the thalamus. And what Korzybski wants is for us to have what he called a cortical-thalamic integration. And by the way, I was looking over the Bible of General Semantics, Science and Sanity. For 40 years, I've said somebody has to rewrite the book. And I think I'm that one, as I've said for many years, although I went into other occupations. I'm amazed at how many high school and college professors, teachers teaching general semantics have never read Science and Sanity. As you saw when I brought it the other day, it's all mangled. It's underlined and ready to be rewritten, although I did copy the index in the back, and that's another way for it to be rewritten. So I was just reading this where Korzybski talks about the cortical-thalamic integration. We have the nervous impulse, and too often when we get mad, angry, the thalamus plays a predominant role in emotional behavior. Whereas the cortex, the higher nerve centers, this plays a predominant role in thinking, in evaluating, in observing. And what we need is the utilization of the cortex more often in our everyday behavior. So you can literally behave like a human being. When you get drunk, it deadens the cortex. And I'm sure about drugs also. That's why these are such evil things, because you're not living up to the human potential. But in between the thalamus and the cortex, sometimes we have a semantic blockage. And literally, general semantics is the study to knock your blockages off. I will cover one of the blockages, the assumption that we know it all. You stop listening. The other day when I read from Richard Feynman, actually, I read the wrong page. But he talked about when he lectured at Carnegie Tech. You have some students who, between himself and the student, they would drop a curtain. They didn't listen. They didn't listen with an open mind. And as I said at the University of Chicago, my course was an elective course, because I took over from someone else who was teaching communication, which was really how to use the telephone. But this is a different kind of a communication course, and boy, do these executives need it. I hope someday we can come in. I'll be happy to come down. And I gave John my brochure on the my Communication Institute in the 50s. And right away he said, "Is this you?" Now, one of the principles that we'll be teaching is the importance of changing your ways of thinking, communicating, behaving, because the world of reality changes. We can't see the change on the macroscopic level. That was the real world of reality to Aristotle in his time. And in Aristotle's time, the world of reality was simple, static. Today we know it is to be tremendously complex. We know so much more. You and I, our nervous systems are being bombarded by language, television, movies. We have to have a defense against this language and semantic environment so we can think intelligently, etc., etc. So here we are. We have to pause and delay and analyze to use the cortex more than we normally do. The first barrier to effective communication was the signal reaction. They tend to react automatically, trigger-like. And you must train yourself, and teachers must teach you and train you how to pause, how to delay, how to analyze, how to manifest a symbol reaction. See, animals act as if it's a signal. They automatically react just like that. And this is how I got into hypnosis in my classes. Because what's the most extreme form of language controlling human behavior? It's hypnosis. And like any powerful instrument, atomic energy, hypnosis, knowledge of medicine, it can be used either in a good way or in an evil way. And hypnosis, the very word hypnosis conjures fear with some people. It's a tremendous, valuable thing. That's where your mental power is, in your subconscious mind. Now, I asked you when I left the other day, the lights are on. If I push the switch down, will the lights go off? See what you're doing? You're pausing, you're delaying, you're analyzing, but she's nodding her head yes. If I push the switch down, can I make a statement of fact that the lights will go off? Well, what? Yes? Is that a statement of fact? What would you have said before I started any lectures? Because now you're pausing, delaying, analyzing. Can I make a statement of fact that if I push the switch down, the lights will go off? What is a statement of fact? See, we're not taught the difference between a factual statement and an inference. That's why we jump to conclusions. Okay. Now can you make a statement of fact that I pushed the switch down and the lights went off? Okay, now it's a statement of fact. Now let me push the same switch. Can you make a statement of fact that if I push the switch up, the lights will go on? And the answer, of course, is no. Not until you do it. So what are the differentiating characteristics between a factual statement and an inference? Here we have two different kinds. A statement of fact. Now notice I said statement. And a statement involving an inference or an assumption. Remember, we talked a lot about assumptions. I said, you're sitting on your assumptions. How do you know the chair won't break? I'm standing on mine when we drive our car. Life is a series of assumptions. Write this down, please. Wisdom begins when you are conscious of your assumptions, unconscious assumptions. In fact, I will give you many, and in my books, and I did bring some for the people from UCSD, my little booklets. I'm giving 5 of each to the library here at San Diego State. Wisdom begins when we are conscious of, and let's fill in the variables. Number 1, our unconscious assumptions. And we have many, many other principles. Okay? So, what's the difference between a statement of fact and a statement involving an inference? Number 1, a factual statement or a statement of fact can only be made after observation, whereas an inference can be made anytime. Before, during, or after observation, or as is usually with no observation at all. Notice during the Clinton and this young lady Monica investigations, how many of the Democrats were defending Clinton, assuming that he told them the truth. And they don't realize that they're in the realm of opinion. They're in the realm of inferences, assumptions, etc. So a statement of fact can only be made after you have observed something. And this is the closest that we can get to the factual level, what we see. Therefore, most of our behavior, most of our communication is what? Factual or inferential? Inferential. Most of what we read, all of what we read, is inferential to us. And our ability to corroborate it is practically zero. This big notebook that I've had, and I didn't realize that I also put Dr. Lee's advanced course. It's got so much good stuff in it, his stuff, not mine. I'm going to rewrite it into a book because I owe it to other people. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And now that I've retired, in fact, my agent wants to book me at what, 4th and B Street, 1,500-seat nightclub. Well, we'll see. They want me to put on a Christmas show December 18th, and now they want a show, etc. But this is more important, I think, to pass on to future generations. Okay. Number 2, notice here, we say that a factual statement can also be made after you have observed something. Well, can you make a statement of fact that I have money in my pocket? No. Now I didn't put this money packet in my right. Now can you make a statement of fact that I have money in my pocket? You still can't until I open it up and I show you, right? Okay. So therefore, number 2, a statement of fact stays with what can be observed. Whereas an inference goes beyond observation. An inference goes beyond observation. For example, here we have the nonverbal factual level, the level of facts. Now, I can make a statement of fact. Notice they are on different orders of abstraction. Statement of fact. This says eraser. Skokie, Illinois. It was manufactured in Skokie, Illinois. Is that a statement of fact? Well, the answer is no. Is it a statement of fact that it says Skokie, Illinois on here? Is it a statement of fact to you? It's a statement of fact to me. I can see it. Does it say Skokie, Illinois? Is it a statement of fact to you now? Okay. Can we make a statement of fact that this was manufactured in Skokie, Illinois? Even if it says it is that a factual statement? No. It's an inference. And so you see, it's the easiest thing in the world to jump to conclusions, to make inferences as if they were statements of fact. Make all the inferences you want. Our life is lived on the inferential level, but know the difference between the two. In other words, write this down, please. Check your inferences. Check your assumptions, especially when you're driving your car, etc., etc. All right. Number 3, we can only make a limited number of statements of fact, but we can make an unlimited number of inferences. It's the easiest thing in the world to make inferences. As Wendell Johnson says in the book People in Quandaries, and please read this book. They're putting it in the library. It's an excellent book. This is the kind of thinking we do when we don't do any thinking. Pass off inferences as if they were a fact. And this is why I wanted you to have your communication diary. You get so many examples of fights and arguments and disagreements and accidents and killings of people who behave like animals. Signal reactions, jumping to conclusions, etc., etc. And this is why theory is not enough. You got to teach people to get this into their nervous system, and especially if you have a way of doing it. And this was Dr. Lee's technique. We've got to train people in intelligence. Presumably, this is what we are doing at universities. But what do we mean by intelligence or intelligent behavior? I'm giving you an outline of the scientific method or intelligent behavior. Another example, number 4 of a statement of fact. And by the way, here's what it looks like. These are inferences. When we jump to conclusions, we bypass the statement of fact level. We pass off our inferences as if they were factual. These two words are very interesting, as if. Read Weinger's book, The Philosophy of As If, or Jeremy Bentham's, his Theory of Fictions. A lot of our behavior is as-ifness. They go into the area mostly in epistemology, theory of knowledge. So we're jumping to conclusions, we're passing off inferences as if they were factual. A statement of fact approaches certainty. Whereas inferences have low to high degrees of probability. Well, too often we jump to conclusions because we behave with the assumption of certainty. This is what I call it, the assumption of certainty. Well, the only certainty that you find in the world of reality is in mathematics and logic by definition. But you and I must orient our lives in terms of the assumption of probability. And this is why businesses go broke. I can drive by and I kind of laugh. I drive by a new business starting up, and I can always tell, never use always and never. I can always tell when a business is going to go broke. And sure enough, a few years later it does. It didn't consider enough of the variables. And there's so much to this, you see. Starting a business, running a business, don't assume that people need your product. Remember I said, find the words for success, find the need and fill it. And make sure that there's a need. It's not what you believe or what you think. It's not your inference or your assumption. Well, the empirical facts dictate business success and personal success. And then finally, if we stick with a factual level, agreement is possible. Whereas if we're purely on the inferential level, don't be surprised if you have disagreement. The old argumentative way of solving problems. This is why in business and industry we have what we call pilot studies. If you want to know whether or not something will work, stop talking and do. That's the extensional way. But the old Aristotelian argumentative, deductive, solving problems by argument and logic, that will not tell you whether or not something will work. You got to get down to the empirical, to the factual level. Here, a few examples here. I've got these illustrations that are in the book. My mother rented a room in our house to 2 boys whom she did not know. She was a little worried at first, but in a few days she stopped fretting. They must be nice boys, she explained. They have towels from the YMCA. Well, I like this one. A man accompanied by a small boy entered a barber shop and he asked for a haircut. When the barber had finished with him, the man said, "I'm going next door for a beer while you cut the kid's hair." The barber gave the boy a haircut and waited for the man to return. Finally, he turned to the kid and he asked, "Where in Pete's sake did your father go to?" "Oh," said the little boy, "that ain't my father. He's the man who stopped me in the street and asked me if I'd like to get a free haircut." Here, case they were going to embalm a person, and the lady wakes up and says, "I'm not dead." Well, there are cases where the embalmers, they assumed they were dead. And I've got many of that. Jealous man beats up wrong man. In Saginaw, Michigan, switchboard operator Ethel Smith answered with a cheery "City Hall." "What?" the caller responded. "City Hall," the Ethel chirped, but got no comeback. "This is City Hall," she tried again. "With whom do you wish to speak?" "I guess with no one," the feminine voice at the other end said slowly. "I discovered this number while going through my husband's pockets." Here's another one to show the difference. See, English textbooks say that a declarative statement states a fact. And if you analyze it, the declarative statement assumes a fact. Notice how factual this sounds. In the next county, an arrogant red rooster was giving chase to a fluttery little hen. She scrambled into the highway to escape him and was run down by a truck. 2 old maids on a nearby porch witnessed the tragedy. "You see," said one of them with an approving nod, "she'd rather die." Notice how factual that sounds. Albert Einstein has said in his book, Sidelights on Relativity, "In my opinion, the answer to this question is briefly this. As far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality." Well, I like this one. Let me finish with this one here. "Men are comic," she said, smiling dreamily. Not knowing whether this indicated praise or blame, I answered non-committally, "Quite true. Really, my husband's a regular Othello. Sometimes I'm sorry I married him." I looked helplessly at her. "Until you explain," I began. "Oh, I forgot that you haven't heard. About 3 weeks ago, I was walking home with my husband through the square. I had on a large black hat, which suits me awfully well, and my cheeks were quite pink from walking. As we passed under the street light, a pale, dark-haired fellow standing nearby glanced at me and suddenly took my husband by his sleeve. "Would you oblige me with a light?" he says. Alexander pulled his arm away, stooped down, and quicker than lightning banged him on the head with a brick. He fell like a log. It was awful. "Why, what on earth made your husband get jealous all of a sudden?" She shrugged her shoulders. "I told you men are very comic." Bidding her farewell, I went out and at the corner came across her husband. "Hello, old chap," I said. "They tell me you've been breaking people's heads open." He burst out laughing. "So you've been talking to my wife, huh? It was jolly lucky that brick came so pat into my hand. Otherwise, just think. I had about 1,500 rubles in my pocket, and my wife was wearing her diamond earrings. Do you think he wanted to rob you? A man accosts you in a deserted spot, asks for a light, and gets hold of your arm. What more do you want?" Perplexed, I left him and walked on. "There's no catching you today," I heard voice say from behind. I looked around and saw a friend I hadn't set eyes upon for 3 weeks. "Lord," I exclaimed, "what on earth has happened to you?" He smiled faintly and asked in turn, "Do you know whether any lunatics have been at large lately?" "I was attacked by one 3 weeks ago. I left the hospital only today." With sudden interest, I asked, 3 weeks ago? Were you sitting in the square?" "Yes, I was. The most absurd thing happened. I was sitting in the square dying for smoke. I didn't have any matches. After 10 minutes or so, a gentleman passes with some old hag. He was smoking. I went up to him, touched him on the sleeve, and asked him in my most polite manner, 'Can you oblige me with a light?' And what do you think? The madman stoops down and picks something up, and the next moment I'm lying on the ground with a broken head, unconscious. You probably read about it in the newspaper. I looked at him and asked earnestly, 'Do you really believe you met up with a lunatic?' 'I'm sure of it.' An hour afterwards, I was eagerly digging in old back numbers of the local paper. At last I found what I was looking for, a short note in the accident column. It was entitled, 'Under the Influence of Drink.' Yesterday morning, the keepers of the square found on a bench a young man whose papers show him to be of good family. He had evidently fallen to the ground while in a state of extreme intoxication and had broken his head on a nearby brick. The distress of this prodigal's parents is indescribable." Of course, the last statement is an inference also. Okay, so this is the second barrier to effective communication. And if we were to go on, you see, let's say we have, here's a box of matches. Dr. Lee used to have a demonstration with that. And can you make a statement of fact that there are matches in the box? We don't know until you open it up and look. So if you're in the level of factual data, you can have or come to agreement. Now, let's go to the third barrier to effective communication. The first barrier to effective communication was the signal reaction. The second barrier to effective communication is jumping to conclusions or acting on inferences as if they were a fact. The third barrier to effective communication, and let me ask the question, can we ever know all about anything? Can we ever know all about anything? All right, as far as we know, we cannot know all about anything. Now, let me ask a different kind of a question. Have you ever met individuals who act as if they know all about something? And this is the third barrier. It's never us, of course. The third barrier to effective communication, Alfred Korzybski called the allness orientation. And this is the assumption that we know it all. When I was teaching general semantics and effective communication with these top executives in business and industry at the University of Chicago, this principle was very, very meaningful to them. Because you give some people a title and something happens to their behavior. Give a man a PhD, an MD degree, they do more talking and less listening. When I was teaching at the Traffic Institute at Northwestern University, when the executives would come in a little t-shirt like some of you are wearing, they were completely different than when they came to class with their Army officer's uniform, Navy officer's uniform, police officer's uniform. And I told you about this colonel who said to me, he wrote me a letter 6 months after the course. He said, I want you to know that during the course, and he was arguing with me, I want you to know I didn't believe one damn word you said. Now I find myself practicing the principles. Please send me your little quiz. I had one president of a company. Normally, as I say, the nicest guys gravitate to the top. They become presidents of companies. But this guy was an ordinary, cantankerous fellow. And I don't mind. I love to have discussions and talk about this, but I didn't think I got to him. Next seminar, his vice president was there. And he said, you know, your course may not have changed his behavior very much. He was unable to see it in himself. Just like one of my friends, a medical doctor, sent his secretary to take my course. And the same thing, she couldn't see it in herself. The moment you can't see the allness in yourself and myself, this is a sure sign of allness. And this executive said, he may have not internalized the principles. And I was surprised what the executives, the vice president, said next. He said, take the course, I think you can use it. You see, he saw the value in it, you needed it. So this allness orientation, the most important thing, although I've been teaching general semantics for many years, it afflicts me as much as other people, but I hope a little less than before I started studying it. It's extremely subtle. People, but I hope a little less than before I started studying it. It's extremely subtle. It's extremely subtle. Now, we can ask the question, why can't we know all about anything? What are the limitations of our acquaintance with things? Well, for one thing, our nervous system. A dog can hear a higher pitch than you and I. There are certain nervous system limitations. Number two, and very, very important, for example, the one whoever got the Berman Chair at UCSD, but Michael Coyle, he's in anthropology, he's in culture. Culture is a tremendously important variable. And this is why anthropology, culture and personality, was my minor, although now he's calling it cultural psychology. But culture, that's anthropology has been the great liberator. There's such a thing as ethnocentrism, which is culturally we assume that we analyze other cultures from our point of view. Egocentrism, etc. Okay, there's a cultural limitation, nervous system limitation, position. You observe something from this point of view, you observe something from this point of view. We can go on and on and on. I've got many more in the book. But notice what happens when we have all of the variables involved limiting our acquaintance to things. And Korzybski, in order to do this, he drew what he called a structural differential. He was really forced into this at, let's see, the New School for Social Research. And John Watson, the behaviorist, was in the audience. Here we have the submicroscopic level. This is the level of electrons, protons, neutrons. This is the level that I'm reading about in my research in Einstein, quantum mechanics, philosophy of science. This is the real world of reality, circa Science 1998. The quote's real world of reality to Aristotle is what we see, called the macroscopic level. The other is the submicroscopic level of electrons, protons, neutrons. This is also called the event level. And then Korzybski had a circle here, and this is the macroscopic level. This is the sense level. This is what we see. Well, where do we get the world of reality from? The human nervous system, and these are the characteristics of the submicroscopic level, the electron, the protons, and neutrons. Korzybski had lines coming down. This is what we abstract or select, the nervous system does, in order to observe the world of reality. These are the characteristics abstracted. He also had strings hanging out. These are what we leave out. We cannot abstract everything, see? Now, is the submicroscopic level on the same level as the macroscopic level? And the answer is no. They are on different orders of abstraction. But too often we confuse them. One scientist said to Korzybski, look at the electrons. And Korzybski, who is conscious of abstracting, said, no, those are the effects of electrons. Nobody has ever seen an electron. And so scientists have projected, notice the word projection, projected into the submicroscopic level many, many things which are really false to fact. Just as the scientists projected the little word ether. It's some kind of a fluid in the air that light goes through. And Einstein's theory of relativity has shown there ain't no such thing as ether. So this is another of the many verbal fictions. It's a fiction. There ain't no such thing in the world. Okay, then Korzybski had a little arrow out here, smaller than this, and this is Fido's order of abstraction. Now, you and I can make a statement of fact because we have abstracted certain characteristics from the macroscopic level, but there are lines going out, things we left out. I will say that this table is brown. I'm abstracting the quality brownness, but I'm not abstracting where it came from, what tools they used to make it. We leave out many, many details, okay? And then we can make an inference. I can say that this table was manufactured in San Diego. That's on a different level than a statement of fact. And to me, this is a genius kind of a description, because general semantics is a theory of non-identity. Only human beings are able to know the difference between the submicroscopic world of reality, the macroscopic statement of fact, inference, and we can put an et cetera here. We can make inference about inferences indefinitely. Okay, so the allness orientation is the assumption that we know it all, the refusal to listen. Oh boy, we could talk about that. All of us need training, especially in the university class. We come to a class, oh, this is old stuff. Make up our minds right away. Refusal to learn. Refusal to change or keep up to date. Etc. And the opposite of the allness orientation is the non-allness orientation. And this is the realization that we do not know-it-all. And there are many, many more in my particular book. Let's see, abstracting allness. Here's one of my favorite in the allness orientation. Then I'll move into the last one very quickly. Notice how subtle this is. Keeps up from observing, from asking questions. A friend of mine who's the father of 12 volunteered to babysit one evening so his wife could have an evening's relaxation at the movies. Don't let a single one of them come downstairs, his wife instructed him as she went out. He promised to carry out orders to the letter and had just settled down to a book when he heard steps on the stairway. Get back upstairs and stay there, he commanded sternly. He read in peace for a few minutes, then again heard soft footsteps. This time he added the threat of a spanking. Soon he again detected stealthy sounds and dashed out in time to see a small lad disappear up the top steps. He had hardly returned to his book when a neighbor came in distractedly. "Oh, Fred," she wailed, "I can't find my Willie anywhere. Have you seen him?" "Here I am, Ma," said a tearful voice from the top of the stairs. "He won't let me go home." Notice how subtle this allness orientation is. Thomas Edison said, "Show me a thoroughly satisfied man, and I will show you a failure." He puts a period or an exclamation point after his personality and name. That's all to be said. This is the third barrier to effective communication. Please read my little book, The Closed Mind, and I give you more examples, illustrations, and conclusions. Number 4, the last that I want to consider, is called projection and misunderstanding. Projection and misunderstanding. And in a regular university course, I have a piece of chalk and eraser. Hey, this is where we came in. And I can go all the way around the room to show you how easy it is to have misunderstandings. Give me a directive that I cannot possibly misunderstand. And the students will say, "Well, write your name on the board." All right? Now, is that what you want me to do? No. All right, give me a directive that I cannot possibly misunderstand. Well, I can go all the way around the room. It's the easiest thing in the world to have misunderstandings. Now, why do we have misunderstandings? And very, very quickly, one of the reasons why we have misunderstandings, and I asked you before, do words have meaning? And all of you said yes, most of you. Words don't mean anything. People mean. Here we have a speaker. And here we have a listener. This is why I said all of you are listening to a different lecture. You are listening with your meaning, and the speaker speaks with his meaning. So they are bypassing each other. And please read my little booklet on why do we have misunderstandings, because there are a lot of examples here. Now, the burden for effective communication is upon who? The speaker or the listener? The teacher knows the answer. Too often we assume, the speaker assumes that he or she is handing over a container of meaning. Remember I told you, and write this down, Dr. Lee coined it, the container myth. That's the mythical assumption that words contain meaning. Words don't mean anything. People mean. As Charles Sanders Peirce, the pragmatic philosopher, said, you do not get meaning, you respond with meaning. And so here we have the speaker speaking with his meaning and the listener listening with his or her meaning. And the question is, how can we get both of them on channel C on the same channel of communication? Now this is called projection or bypassing, where they are bypassing each other. And why do we have misunderstanding? Now you'll see why I put these 4 principles at the beginning of the course. When we have signal reactions, we automatically assume that we know what the speaker means. When we jump to conclusions, we have misunderstandings. We have an allness orientation. We assume, notice the word assume again, that we understand them. This is the subtle allness orientation. But if we manifest a non-allness orientation, we will ask Joe or Jane, is this how you're using the word? Oh, I could give you examples from the Second World War. For example, the reason why there are so many people killed in Pearl Harbor is because a non-commissioned officer, a lower level, he saw planes coming, and he mentioned something to an officer higher up, and the officer said, forget about it. There's nothing in the books that say there should be planes passing over. And there's so many cases in police departments, in the Army, the Navy, military, education, et cetera, the allness orientation. So remember the importance of asking questions. The speaker has the burden to invite the listener to get on his or her channel of communication. Joe, do you know what I want you to do? The listener also must ask the speaker, is this what you mean? But too often we think we appear stupid if we ask, what do you mean? Because some dogmatic, allness-oriented speakers or executives, they cut you off. They say, why, you stupid SOB? I told you what I mean. And there are many, many examples in books, in communication, in management. And now you see, those of you who might become management consultants, if you teach it this way, now you see why communication is so important. Let me just finish with one example. Although we realize that we should change our ways of thinking, communicating, and behaving, it's still extremely difficult for us to do so. That's why I gave my little quizzes. For me to ask you to just think about it and memorize a few things, this is not learning. But for you to change your behavior, that's something else again. And I think some of you, or all of you, quotes, have changed your behavior to a degree since we have met. Am I right? A little different way of evaluating, of utilizing the cortex. But although we realize that we should change our ways of thinking, communicating, and behaving, it's extremely difficult for some of us to do so, as exemplified in this final example. There was once a man who went around saying, you know, I think I'm dead. His friends finally persuaded him to consult a psychiatrist. When the patient told the psychiatrist that he thought he was dead, the psychiatrist told him to clench his fists, stand before a mirror and say, dead men don't bleed. He told the man to repeat this motion 6 times a day for a month, each time saying, dead men don't bleed. He told the man to go home and carry out his instructions and return at the end of the month. The patient carried out the psychiatrist's instructions, and at the end of the month he returned. The psychiatrist told him once again to go through the motions. The reason he had him tighten his fists was so the veins would come to the surface of the man's wrists. The man tightened his fists, and just as he said, dead men don't bleed, the psychiatrist jabbed a scalpel into the man's wrist. The blood gushed out, and the man hollered, by God, dead men do bleed. Let me finish with one word of advice and one simple thing. Anytime, and we've all been lectures, instructors, anytime you get such a wonderful audience, and all of you have been attentive, because I've had some negative ones, etc., it's deeply appreciated by any teacher when you're so open-minded. And I want to leave you with one bit of advice, and I mean this very, very sincerely. Don't believe one word I've said. Go out and try it. Thank you all very much.
One of the things we've learned from Dr. Berman